So this goes with the reading by Paul Gingrich. Paul Gingrich wrote a summary of Talcott-Parsons' theory. So let me tell you a little bit about Talcott-Parsons. He was an American sociologist. He lived from 1902 to 1979. His ideas can be classified as a type of social evolutionism theory, which basically attempted to apply Charles Darwin's biological theories to society. In 1951, Talcott-Parsons published his theory of pattern variables that he believed accurately described modern societies in contrast to pre-modern or traditional societies. So you see here on the right-hand side, the variables that Talcott-Parsons believes describe modern societies, and then on the left-hand side, those that describe pre-modern or traditional societies. And these two terms can be used interchangeably in this framework, pre-modern, traditional, same thing. Just a small note before we talk about these variables, when you hear the word modern in this context, it should call to mind these characteristics. Another good way to think about this is to compare feudal Europe, so almost ancient times, with today. Or maybe even with kind of the 1900s era, because today, arguably, we are in a postmodern society. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is because when people hear the word modern, sometimes they think it just means current or recent in time. Within this theory, that's not really what Talcott-Parsons is talking about. He's talking about something like developed, progressive, and you have to place it within the context he was writing, which was the 1950s, when there was a very big gap between Western Europe and the United States and the whole rest of the world. So let's go through these variables. So we'll start with pre-modern, and again, think about feudal Europe, and I'm going to give examples from feudal times. So let's start with ascription. An example of ascription in feudal times would be the fact that nobility was determined from birth. So if you were a noble, it was because your father was a noble before you. And in feudal times, wealth and status were largely dependent on who your family was. So that's an example of ascription. Diffuseness. And this is the idea that people held many roles in society and there wasn't much division of labor. So, when a feudal woman woke up in the morning, she might first collect some berries, and then she might go and milk the cows, and then she might go help her husband out in the fields. And so she's not fulfilling a certain occupation that requires specialized skills. She is fulfilling many different jobs throughout the day, and that's the idea of diffuseness. She has many roles in that society. Next, we have affectivity. Affectivity is the idea that displaying emotion, even violent emotion, was considered normal at the time. So when you read stories of feudal times, someone might get angry and kill someone. This is something that would not be tolerated in a modern society, but the idea here is that it's okay to show intense emotion, and that's considered normal, even if that emotion is violent and results in you destroying something or breaking something or killing someone. Next, we have particularism. Particularism is the idea that decisions were made and favors were granted based on personal relationships. So if the king liked you or if the Lord liked you, you got what you wanted. Next, we have collectivity. This is the idea that individuals didn't have much agency and they were expected to look out for the greater good. So you're expected to go and farm for your family and for your village, and it doesn't really matter if you personally enjoy farming or not. In fact, people probably didn't even stop to ask themselves, do I enjoy farming as an occupation? They just did it because that was what you did for the collective. Finally, we have expressive. This is the idea that developing relationships is more important than accomplishing certain tasks. So in feudal society, it's more important what the Lord thinks of you rather than the exact number of how much you harvested that term. Let's contrast this to modern. So think about kind of the 1900s when you think about modern, maybe even around the time Talcott Parsons was writing, so the 1950s, which was immediately after the end of World War II. So he argues that a modern society is characterized by achievement. So this is where people can obtain higher social status by working hard. So if you achieve certain things, you can have upward mobility in society and you can achieve a higher income bracket for yourself and your family. Specificity. So this is the idea that people hold specialized jobs, there is division of labor, and you need specific skills for the job that you're doing. Think about a line of production on a factory floor. Each person is doing a very specific job and only that job. Very different from what the feudal woman does throughout her day when she wakes up in feudal society. Next, we have affective neutrality. So this is the idea that you're not really supposed to show emotion, especially violent emotion. If you show extreme emotion when you're out in public, people are going to think it's weird or they're going to feel uncomfortable. So imagine if someone just started yelling in the middle of a University of Michigan class, that would make the majority of people feel very uncomfortable. Next, we have universalism. This is the idea that decisions are made based on objective criteria and are applied to all candidates equally. Next, we have self. So in a modern society, the individual is of the utmost importance. What I want as a person is important. People have a lot of agency and people are encouraged to be independent, to make a living for themselves, not to rely on other people. And you even hear language like, I need to go find myself, or I need to discover who I am, because that's an important value in modern society. Finally, we have instrumental. This is the idea that accomplishing particular tasks is more important than developing relationships. So when you're working a job, your employer is going to care more about, are you checking the boxes of doing your job, than are you a nice person that they like. So let's kind of think about this a little bit, criticize it a little bit. This theory could be called a typology. A typology is just a way of categorizing things based on characteristics. So it's basically saying, if you see these characteristics, that thing, that society is modern. If you see these characteristics, that thing is pre-modern. But I think anytime that someone presents you with a typology, you need to ask yourself, does this really help me understand the world? And maybe it does. And if it does, be prepared to justify how it helps you understand the world. So I'm going to pause. I'm going to ask you to pause the video for a moment and think for a minute. Does this help you understand the world? And if so, why? If not, why? So pause the video and think about that. So I think that this typology probably seemed reasonable in 1951 when Talcott Parsons created it. In 2020, I think there are some issues because in 2020, there are many countries that are developed, that have high GDPs, that are doing very well, that have progressed, but that are non-Western. So think about countries like South Korea or South Africa. And the question is, if culturally these people don't have these modern traits, is the country still modern? I think some of these variables make sense. So for example, the achievement variable. It makes sense that if a society is rewarding people based on their achievements, that's going to be better for the society as a whole, rather than just relying on family ties, which may or may not, actually predict if someone is a good person or is going to be good at what they do. So I think that variable makes sense. But personally, I struggle to justify a variable like affective neutrality. mean, this is a characteristic of many Western societies, but many non-Western societies don't particularly value affective neutrality, and they embrace emotion. And I'm not sure that that necessarily hinders a country from developing or being quote unquote modern. Just to make it even more clear kind of why I want to critique this, let's look at a different typology. So this is a typology of gender. On the left hand, we have traits that are considered feminine, and on the right hand, we have traits that are considered masculine. Now, if we saw this typology again in 1951, when Talcott Parsons was writing, this may have seemed reasonable. If we had looked around the world, we may have noticed that most of the women around in the 1950s were in fact submissive, home-oriented, nurturing. But the question is that an inherent characteristic of women or femininity, or was that simply a product of 1950s society? And so, again, I think it's important to look at these individual variables and really ask, does this work? Does this give me useful information about the world? Or is it just that these things happen to align in some people some of the time? Or in the case of Talcott Parsons, these things happen to align in some societies some of the time. I think in 2020, we very much know that some men are very nurturing and some women are very independent. And so I think it behooves us to question a little bit, is this typology useful? And if so, how and why? Which parts of this do we want to take and use? And which parts maybe don't apply to the world anymore in 2020?